Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Yeah, we got a lot of very interesting comments based on my exploding eyeball. Stacy Herbert, tell us about it.
Well, first we'll look at this. I bet you he's checking the phone book right now for all the Jamie Dimons. That's the Maxinator you see there, Max.
That's fantastic. I'd like to make a movie like that where I roam the streets looking for banking terrorists with like some huge 50 caliber weapon on both shoulders, you know, looking for these guys, tearing them down, shooting them all, mowing them all down.
Well, the top comment comes from Elite 1980s on YouTube, and he said, Max is the Terminator with one mission in mind. Take out J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, Wall Street, Bank of England, the reptilians, George Bush and Tony Blair, my local police force, the scumbags, David Cameron, beep, I've run out of space. Max, just finished the mission you were assigned to. Hasta la vista, baby.
The Maxinator. Hey, this should be a film on PirateMyFilm.com.
There does seem one organization in the employ of the Maxinator, and that's Fitch. Fitch goes on major bank downgrade rampage. Fitch just cut the viability ratings of 8 major banks. It downgraded Bank of America, Barclays, BNP Paribas, Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank, Societe Generale, and it affirmed the viability rating of UBS. Failed to take down J.P. Morgan, though, Max.
Well, they're kind of like a French-based outfit. And I think this is in response now to S&P and Moody's, which are more U.S.-based. So now the rating agencies have gotten involved in the ratings war as well as the currency war. But what's remarkable to me is that 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when it would have been valuable to downgrade those banks at that time when their balance sheets were exploding in the shadow banking system and off-balance sheet toxic liabilities, that would have been helpful. But now that the world is trying to recover from the realization of these toxic debts off balance sheet, then Rumpelstiltskin, Fitch, Moody's, and S&P finally wakes up and applies a negative rating at the worst possible time. It's as if they're purposefully trying to destroy the economy, which I guess, based on everything we're hearing from these kleptocratic megalomaniacs, that's exactly what they're trying to do.
Fitch says despite the significant progress it sees the banks have made in building up capital and liquidity buffers to resist market changes, Fitch reports that these banks are sensitive to high volatility and low confidence in the markets. That's kind of what defines these markets, so it's a little bit worrying that they're saying the low confidence. In fact, there's no confidence. If these banks themselves weren't so engaged in so many fraudulent activities and stealing so many of their customers' funds, maybe there would be a little bit more confidence in the markets.
Yeah, good point. Stop stealing customer funds, MF Global, J.P. Morgan, and we'll see whether confidence returns.
Those are two banks that are not actually listed here. I'm talking also about Bank of America. I'm talking about Barclays, BNP Paribas, Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank, and Societe Generale here, Max.
Oh, I got a story about Goldman Sachs.
Okay, well, let's save that for next year, 2012.
Okay, it's too hot for this show.
What's your story about Goldman Sachs?
Well, they're in trouble because they tried to issue a fake Sukuk bond. Islamic finance, according to the FT. Goldman Sachs has tried to pawn off a fake bond in the Islamic finance world. They got some shyster mullah to give it the okay, even though it didn't comply with Sharia law. And they thought they had trouble before. Forget about Moody's, Fitch, and S&P. Wait until a mullah downgrades Goldman Sachs.
They could have that fatwa rating that it doesn't look so good for them then?
Yeah, why can't they come out with a fatwa rating to apply to the debt of all these banks? Goldman Sachs would definitely get a very low fatwa rating at this time. Boy, oh boy, who is that author that's running around?
Okay, well, let's move on to these currencies wars. You know, Fitch is a French company, and it was convenient that just recently S&P was threatening to downgrade French debt. So it's now full-out rating currency war. This is going into more like the Great Depression. These are the events leading up to the Great Depression 1. Here's Great Depression 2. France loses credit rating, it should be the UK. Head of central bank hits out as tensions rise in London and Paris. And this is the head of the Central Bank of France, Christian Neuer. And he says France is bracing itself for the potential loss of its coveted AAA rating after two credit rating agencies last week indicated they were considering marking down countries across the Eurozone. But Banque de France Governor Christian Neuer said they should instead be looking at the UK because of the scale of debt and inflation and the poor levels of growth and bank lending on this side of the channel.
Well, he's absolutely correct. And let me explain something to the audience. The response from the UK to Christian Neuer, who said that the UK should be downgraded, not France. The response from the UK was like, well, the markets think otherwise. The markets are giving our gilt, our sovereign bond market, a lower yield due to higher demand. The markets are saying the opposite of you, Christian Neuer. That's absolute poppycock. What the UK fails to mention is that the reason gilts are yielding so low is because the Bank of England is engaged in quantitative easing, which just means that the Bank of England is buying its own bonds. It's eating its own vomit. And for that reason, yields are low, whereas the ECB is not engaging in quantitative easing. The big debate around the world today is that the world wants the ECB to engage in quantitative easing, to buy back its own bonds, and to buy back the bonds of various sovereign countries in the EU as a way to play ball with these financial terrorists. Well, maybe France and Germany say, you know what, we don't want to play ball with financial terrorists like Mervyn King over in the UK. Maybe we'd like to have more of a sustainable economy based on organic growth, not just financial terrorists, like you find in the City of London, like you find at now, who's getting really his clock cleaned is the fellow over there at RBS, who's now really in deep trouble because they found out that he's been breaking all kinds of laws.
But let's stay on this war going on between Britain and France because I have several headlines here. So here's another headline from the French ministers attacking David Cameron. They've gone all out on this, I guess, during an election season coming up, and also this war that David Cameron apparently started with the French. Better to be French than British, says French finance minister, and here's a little video clip of him, François Bayrou.
On n'a pas de leçon à donner, mais on n'a pas de leçons à recevoir. On en a reçu quelques-unes. C'est vrai que la situation économique de la Grande-Bretagne est aujourd'hui très préoccupante et qu'on préfère être français que britannique en ce moment sur le plan économique.
Mais pourquoi vous les tapez?
Parce qu'on ne veut pas recevoir de leçons. On n'en donne pas. On ne veut pas en recevoir.
Of course, any sane person would rather be French than British. Just look at a recent study that came out about Facebook users. 75% of British Facebook users feature photos of themselves drunk. Okay, that should tell you something about that country. All the policymakers are drunk. Mervyn King is mostly in the bag. All the people who are trying to do business over there in the City of London are, for the most part, inebriated.
Well, some more French people pile on here. Doom and gloom. IMF boss says every economy is at risk as Britain's credit rating is threatened. So this is Christine Lagarde. She's the managing director of the IMF, and she's issued a stark warning to world markets by claiming the future is gloomy and every economy in the world is at risk. Her comments came as tensions between London and Paris were heightened further after the head of France's central bank suggested that the UK was a candidate for a credit rating downgrade.
Look, no country in the G20 has a higher debt to GDP ratio than the UK. It's 1,000%. The banking industry alone has debts to GDP of 500% times 5 times GDP. You're telling me that is a bond market and a stock market and an economy you want to invest in? And once this Olympic bubble bursts in a few months, you'll see that economy collapse.
Speaking last week, Lagarde said there is no economy in the world, whether low-income countries, emerging markets, middle-income countries, or super-advanced economies, that will be immune to the crisis that we see not only unfolding, but escalating. So here you have partly this war going on between France and Britain. And then also you have going on, Max, you have the IMF seeking to introduce some sort of world global government by causing global fear.
Well, that's, of course, Christine Lagarde is playing a two-sided game here. She'd love to bring in a world governance and the special drawing right as the global currency to replace the U.S. dollar. Now, this, of course, should be protested against, but who's going to stop them? Is it going to be the inebriated Brits? I don't think so. This is the job for the Occupy movements and the Protester, Time Magazine, Person of the Year, to defeat this New World Order initiative by Christine Lagarde, of course. So she can't be trusted as far as you can throw her.
Yeah, but nobody can, Max. And it's really this childlike behavior going on as the last resort. When all else fails, you throw mud pies at each other on the playground, right? It's le roast beef versus the frogs going on. So the final headline here, Max, in this first half, Nicolas Sarkozy, obsessive David Cameron acting like stubborn child. Sarkozy said Cameron behaved like an obstinate kid with a single obsession, protecting the city, which wants to carry on behaving like an offshore center. No country supported him.
All the Tories in the UK are big babies because they're all born with silver spoons in their mouth. They never worked a day in their life. They go to these public schools. Look at Boris Johnson, the mayor of London. He's the biggest baby of all. None of them can be trusted. They're immature. They don't know anything about finance, economics, or markets. They take all their advice from shysters in the City of London, and David Cameron is on the way out. He's not going to be reelected. He's not going to make it. Maybe the Tories will be, but he's gone as a party leader.
Well, this is an important story, however, Max, for the United States and the U.S. citizen and the taxpayer of the United States, because one thing that is never addressed here in the U.S. market is just how much London plays, how crucial a role it plays in the fraud and the theft of U.S. investors and taxpayers. All of the AIG fraud happened through there. All of Bernie Madoff's fraud happened through there. All of Lehman's fraud happened through there. And now all of MF Global's fraud happened through there. And I have some stories in the second half relating to what it actually means. I am staying for the second half.
That's fantastic. So in the second half, we're going to really dive into the UK as world headquarters of financial fraud.
No, not that. What I'm saying is that I would like to cover what impact all of these fraudsters play, what sort of role they play in actually decimating the livelihoods and life experience of people around the world, what the result of all the fraud that we're talking about, and the result of the inaction, the buffoonery, the clownish behavior of Sarkozy calling Cameron an obstinate kid and Cameron calling him a frog or whatever. It's just childlike behavior when the real world crisis is real for other people. It's not a fake story.
Fantastic. Don't go away. Stay right there. We'll be right back. Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. We're back with Stacy Herbert, who's going to delve into the real consequences, the personal tragedies as the result of banking terrorism. We don't focus on these as much, but let's get into it. Stacy.
Yes, well, in the first half, we talked about the global fraud going on with the bankers and this charade, these games of downgrades. Let's look at the actual real-life downgraded lives of people around the world, in particular in the U.S. The scandal of the Alabama poor cut off from water. So remember, Jefferson County, Alabama has filed for bankruptcy, the largest in the U.S. history. And what happened is they set out to build a $300 million sewage system, and lo and behold, walked in J.P. Morgan with some credit derivatives to sell them, interest rate swaps, which turned that $300 million sewage system into a $3.1 billion sewage system. So they've now gone bankrupt. Alabama, one of the poorest in all the whole U.S., has also one of the highest water rates in all of the U.S. We're going to look at some of the stories. Tammy Lucas is the human face of a financial and political scandal that has brought one of the most deprived communities in America's South to the point of what some local people believe is collapse. She says, quote, if the sewer bill gets higher, my light might get cut off. And if I try to catch up the light, my water might get cut off. So we're in between. We can't make it like this. So her average monthly sewage bill, the amount levied by the county to flush away waste and provide water for baths and showers, has quadrupled in the past 15 years.
Okay, so what we're saying here is that as banks steal money from the economy using derivatives and other fraudulent devices that have their main nexus of transactions in the City of London, we have real people in real communities suffering real hardship as the result of this draconian wealth larceny that's happening. And these folks are like Bolivia. Their water supply was privatized by Bechtel. They eventually overturned that because they went to war with Bechtel. These people, if they look around the world for inspiration about what to do, they need to go to war with the banks. Unless they want to be basically shuttled off like those American Indians were 200 years ago into reservations and starved to death. I mean, that's what Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan wants. They want to create a new reservation for these poor people.
Well, this woman, Mrs. Lucas, she says that her water bill currently runs at $150 a month. So remember, the average food stamp amount that you receive is about $114. So it costs more to flush it away than to actually consume the food you're given.
I remember J.P. Morgan runs the food stamp program.
Oh, that's true.
So they have two ways to rip off the poor. Not only do they create a food stamp program that debases the currency and makes it impossible for anyone to break out of poverty, then they use their investment banking side to create 10 times the municipal debt needed to put in a simple sewage system, so these people are without a sewage system. So they're living like, any really impoverished, poor third world country. You look at Haiti. What's happened in Haiti? They had, of course, an earthquake that caused massive poverty. And down in these counties in the South of America, it was the earthquake called J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs.
And this is part of the conflict that you see going on between France and Britain as well, because Britain has adopted a hyper-U.S. financialized model. The French people don't want that, which is why Sarkozy and his ministers have to fight against it. But this is the consequence. This is the next step. This is what you're going to see British people living like soon enough. They talked to a guy who doesn't want to be named, and he's one of the growing number in the area that now has a blue portable toilet next to it. He says he finds it cheaper to buy drums of water from a petrol station and pay a sanitation company about $14 a month to remove waste from his porta potty than pay the combined sewer and water rate, which some months can reach $300.
Well, exactly. The British society and the British economy is collapsing due to the terrorists in the city of London, and that's why the signal from the looters that were out on the prowl a few months ago to number 10 Downing Street was misheard. They should have understood that those looters were trying to make a good point there, that if you allow looting at the top, expect looting at the bottom. And you're destroying your economy by allowing this looting to go on, David Cameron and George Osborne. So you reap what you sow, my friend.
The water and sewage rates were due to go up 8.2% per year for the next 3 years, but that is now more likely to be 10% a year or more. Some are saying that it might go up as much as 25%, according to the court-appointed receiver, John S. Young. So in response, Sheila Tyson, a community activist, says, quote, "These people are going to end up rioting about this. If they let this stuff happen, they are going to get the biggest riot the South has ever seen over this sewer business. I can see it coming."
Well, absolutely. It's a civil war is brewing between the rich and the poor, and this is going to happen in the U.S. It'll explode quite dramatically at some point, I would anticipate. And, of course, there are over 250 million guns in that country, so to add a little spice and flavor to it.
Before I move on to the next example of what it's like to be a victim of fraud, I want to note here the two-tier justice system going on, because investment bank J.P. Morgan Securities and two of its former directors have faced civil fines for bribing county officials at Jefferson County, whereas 21 of the former commissioners and executives in the Jefferson County have been found guilty or are facing criminal charges. So there are two different systems of justice here. If you're a banker, the most you ever face are civil fines.
Right. The bankers are the madams. They're the ones who are operating the brothel. And they're the ones who should be charged first. Don't blame the Johns, the buyers of the service of prostitution. Get rid of the prostitutes. Get rid of Morgan and Goldman and HSBC and Barclays and all those other banks. Get rid of the madams, the brothels, the drug dens, the terror dens. Get rid of those. You see? You're blaming the victim. Oh, that's right. You also work for the terrorists. Sorry.
Well, let's move on to the MF Global fraud and see some of the victims there, because a lot of people have no sympathy. They're saying that these are just the gambling sort. They shouldn't bet money they can't lose. And here NPR speaks to a rancher, Tim Ritsky, who is a rancher, small rancher, has a cattle ranch, and Here's his story. Rancher discusses losing money with MF Global. The bankruptcy of MF Global and the mismanagement of his clients' money is causing trouble for a lot of ranchers and farmers. They were major clients of MF Global, buying futures contracts to hedge against swings in the value of their crops and livestock. This is why Tim Ritzke says it's the opposite of gambling. It was actually being more prudent in protecting his income. So here the NPR asked, how do you feel about investing in the futures market now?
I have no confidence whatsoever in it, and I don't see how anybody could, because basically what happened, Lynn, is that I had a segregated account with MF Global. They were the brokerage, and with the stroke of a computer key, somebody hit enter, and my money went to cyberspace somewhere, and I have no confidence that that couldn't happen in any other brokerage. When I had a hedge account to protect my prices, I didn't want to invest in European sovereign debt. I didn't want to invest in MF Global. I had nothing to do with their business. They just stole my money. That's the bottom line. And now I have to figure out how to get it back.
All right, well, let's explain something to the audience here about futures contracts. They came into existence, really, going back to their origins, for the most part, to give farmers a way to take some of the risk out of farming. Farming being a risky business because crops are subject to wide price volatility as relates to something very unpredictable called the weather. So farmers are able to sell their crops at a future price today, take some of that risk out. Now, there are people on the other side of that trade who are going to speculate that it's a buy at that price. Okay, that's the futures market. Then in 1980s, that basic industry that served agriculture was adopted by financial futures, treasury bonds, and currencies, and that was the beginning of the meltdown. It goes back to the beginning of financial futures that replaced agricultural futures as the main driver of business and finance around the world. Now, the tail is wagging the dog. The financial futures are pushing out the legitimate businesses like the farmer and saying, well, you don't put enough into this economy because we are now our cancer that is 60 to 70% of the economy is financial futures trading. We don't need farming anymore. We can always just eat Twinkies. We don't need you. Get out of the way. So this is how the encroachment of the kakistocracy, the worst amongst us, has invaded the public domain and the general and real economy with their financial futures derivatives trading nightmare.
Yeah, and just as the fraud at J.P. Morgan is causing people to turn to porta potties throughout the South, here's a man who now has no access to his $30,000 in his futures account, which MF Global is not returning calls. He said he's not able to get any information at all. Nobody has ever called him. The only information he gets is by Googling MF Global. He has to search to see what the news is.
Oh, watch this show.
Yeah, or check out, again, J.P. Morgan. Look at the treatment J.P. Morgan has received from MF Global. In fact, they had heads up. They had early notice that the firm was going bankrupt, and that's why they were able to seize all the client funds to make sure that their debts owed by MF Global were paid off. Here's a man who has no way to get his cash. It's uncertain whether or not he can continue to exist as a viable business.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, the reason the money is not available to these customers is because the person lending the money to Corzine, J.P. Morgan, is not letting any of that money to the customer accounts that were actively involved with MF Global. You see, J.P. Morgan is the one who let John Corzine rack up 40-to-1 leverage. He was going back to the window and saying, I need more money to borrow from Morgan, and Morgan kept lending him money. Then, see, you would assume that would mean taking a risk. But when he went out of business, they suffered no risk. They went into the customer accounts and took it from customers. So Corzine's a patsy for Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon is really the lead bad guy and villain in this story.
But, Max, also there's the CME group. And normally in this situation, they would have covered the funds. They would have provided the liquidity for customers who had legitimate accounts there. And Chicago is the center. This is where the futures trading for real farmers and ranchers started. Since it went public a few years ago now, they're only servicing the big guys like J.P. Morgan and MF Global. Those guys get away with all the crime, while the victims, of course, are at the other side of the trade, which are the real ranchers and farmers. And that's like the last of anything real production in America. And if that goes, then all you have is J.P. Morgan and John Corzine.
Right, trading with each other. And eventually they'll all end up on some Zynga-related virtual finance game in cyberspace, trading Zynga dollars and taking their exhaust of their fraud public, as Zynga just did for a few $1 billion, trading virtual nothings for virtual nothing currency.
And one last quick headline. Census shows 1 in 2 people are poor or low income in America. Now, fully half of Americans qualify as poor or low income. Now, all these farmers being wiped out via the CME group and MF Global. Remember, one thing that did exist during the first Great Depression were many small farms, which you could often get food. They would help you out and feed you their cattle, but now they're being wiped out, and it's just going to be one giant Monsanto or Archer Cargill sort of big, giant monopolist farm that they're not going to feed you, they're going to let you die.
Yeah, and what's remarkable, I just saw a statistic, is that half of America is either at or below the poverty line. But they just did a survey, 43% of Americans don't see any wealth or income gap in America. So I think it goes back to that study that came out just a few weeks ago, that people who watch Fox News are actually less informed than people who watch no news at all. Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. If you want to send us an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Till next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.